Good evening and welcome to Primetime Lawmakers for March 31st, 2011, the 37th legislative day of the 2011 session of the Georgia General Assembly. I'm Scott Slade. Coming up at tonight's program, a bill to establish a new state Department of Public Health passes the Senate. The House agrees to Senate changes and the bill heads for Governor Deal's desk. And tense negotiations continue over the tax overhaul bill. The House and Senate decide to postpone tomorrow's session and consider the measure after the General Assembly returns from spring break. We continue our leadership interview series tonight. Wandy Lawson asked Department of Early Care and Learning Commissioner Bobby Cagle about changes to pre-K. And we'll be talking education and teacher pay with Tim Callahan, the Public Relations and Membership Director of the Professional Association of Georgia Educators, PAGE. All that is coming up tonight on Primetime Lawmakers. But first, the notable absence of action at HB 387, the tax code revision, rumored to be on the House floor today. Instead, negotiations led the General Assembly to adopt a new schedule, going into recess tomorrow and returning Monday, April 11th. And Wandy Lawson has the rest of the legislative news in tonight's Capitol Report.
A lot of legislative action today under the Gold Dome, beginning with final passage of a measure creating a freestanding Department of Public Health, independent of the Department of Human Services. Presenting HB 214 today, Senator Renee Unterman said it would give stature to a division that has often, in her words, been shafted and robbed.
Oftentimes, when you're at the bottom of the ringer of 36 agencies like Public Health was in the Department of Human Services, it was the one that got cut the most. It was always at the bottom of the heap, and it was always the one that money was gone to take care of children in specifically.
Is it true that we're not going to add any money at this point, but we're going to preserve the monies for this operation that it would have spent under the Department of DCH?
Yes, in the current budget, the budget stays the same. And what the Senate did do and the House agreed with, what the House put in, was the grant and aid money. And as you know, there are several of us in this body that have contentious feelings about that grant and aid and feel like it's not appropriately done per capita. The money is not appropriated based on population correctly with the growth in the metro's areas. But yes, ma'am, I do believe that the department will become more transparent and that it will become more efficient and that it will have a person over it that is accountable to the governor.
HB 214 cleared the Senate by a vote of 46-7. Later this afternoon, the House approved the Senate adoption of a hemophilia advisory board, marking final passage of that legislation and sending HB 214 to the governor's office. Passage in the House also today of a measure aimed at cracking down on prescription drug addicts was preceded by over 90 minutes of debate, pitting those who believe that the establishment of an electronic drug database would violate personal privacy rights against those who want to crack down on doctor shopping.
What this bill does is this sets up a procedure for the remittance of prescriptions that have been filled by a dispenser, which would be a pharmacy, or a pharmacist or a physician who dispenses his own drugs, and they'll have to remit this in electronic form to the Drugs and Narcotics Agency, who will maintain a database.
One of the prosecutors who spoke in the committee in support of this bill used this example. He said, if we find that Susie Q has hit 16 pharmacies in a short period of time, but we can't find Susie, we can start looking at where the drugs are coming from. Now, what he was saying is investigators will be able to start trolling the database, looking for anomalies and patterns of prescription use or abuse. They're going to be trolling your private health information.
SB 36 passed the House by a vote of 117-45, but since that measure now contains the language of HB 184, it returns to the Senate. Likewise, a measure that came over from the Senate as gun carry legislation became a vehicle today in the House for passage of the Runaway Youth Safety Act. SB 94 now grants up to 72 hours of immunity from prosecution for some service providers who harbor runaways. Representative Tom Weldon explains.
These are children, frankly, who are out there that don't have children that are, or don't have parents that are looking for them. They aren't being searched for like you'd be searching for yours, but these are children that are either fleeing from a difficult situation or they've been run out of a home. for one reason or another.
The revised SB 94 passed the House by a vote of 160 to 6. Of course, it now needs to return to the Senate. In other news, legislation removing the restriction that South Georgia hunters who bait wild pig and deer must shoot from 200 yards away cleared the Senate, but not before it was argued that the practice can create environmental pandemic.
Now, all of you have heard about giving supplemental nutrition to deer could cause chronic waste disease. Well, for 15 years, we've been allowing for the feeding of supplemental nutrition to deer, and we haven't had not one case. But if that were to occur in this legislation, it gives the board of the Department of Natural Resource the ability to restrict within a county that a communicable disease may be found, to restrict that feeding in that county.
Are you familiar with the studies that have, I saw them at least 8 years ago when we debated this bill in the House and defeated it, but it was the studies from Michigan where they did permit baiting. They allowed the practice, and they had an outbreak in the white-tailed deer population of bovine tuberculosis, and then it spread to the domestic livestock. And the letter that I placed on people's desks from the Michigan authorities attests that they have spent more than $100 million has been costed to the Michigan cattle industry, and that the DNR and the state and federal funds, more than $86 million in state revenue, trying to eradicate the outbreak. And they had been TB-free before they started this practice of deer baiting. Are you familiar with that study? And does that give you some concern about whether we could be setting the stage for losing our TB-free status here in Georgia?
I've seen those studies, and they're kind of like a lot of other studies that it depends on location, it depends on who writes it and who does the studying. And as I stated earlier to the senator from 36, there's a lot of people feel compassionate on either side of this issue, and that's what we're going to debate, and that's what we're going to vote on.
The Senate approved HB 277 by a vote of 34 to 17. Changes made in the Senate sent it back to the House. The House, meanwhile, voted to urge the Department of Natural Resources and the Georgia Environmental Finance Authority to investigate the possibility of making the Tennessee River a major water source for the state. Here's Representative Jay Neal with H.R. 424.
Walker, Catoosa, and Dade County. We have 4 creeks in those 3 counties that carry approximately 725 million gallons of our water across the state line and deposits them in the Tennessee River. We have a rock quarry in Rossville. 2 of those creeks merge together and come through that rock quarry. We also have a railroad line through that rock quarry that extends to the vicinity of Rome. And we believe that it's a legitimate study to look at the possibility of capturing our water there in northwest Georgia.
The House approved H.R. 424 without dissenting vote. In other capital news, those pushing for federal recognition of the birthday of farm workers' rights icon Cesar Chavez were joined by legislators who oppose immigration reform legislation being considered by the General Assembly. Senator Nan Orrock characterized SB 40 and HB 87 as anti-immigration hysteria, and Senator Vincent Ford pointed to actions that could be taken if the bills become law.
In the spirit of Cesar Chavez, let me tell you where I'm at. I'm at the point where we need to have a boycott of Georgia if these bad immigration bills pass. The
Georgia Association of Latino Elected Officials stopped short of endorsing a boycott, however, preferring to promote a federal immigration plan.
Ultimately, we do think that something needs to be done about illegal immigration. But Representative Ramsey and other Georgia legislative leaders are acting on a fool's errand. It is not up to the states to enact 50 different immigration policies. It doesn't make sense, and it's against our Constitution and federal laws. So again, we urge our legislature not to move forward on any kind of immigration restriction or enforcement schemes. We move for them to work with our congressional delegation, who is all Republican, mostly Republican, majority Republican, work with them to come up with a solution with President Obama.
Finally, the House today agreed to adhere to its position on the 2012 budget and appointed a conference committee consisting of Representatives Jan Jones and Larry O'Neill, as well as Appropriations Chairman Terry England. Reporting from the Capitol, I'm Nwandi Lawson for Primetime Lawmakers.
Thanks very much, Nwandi, for that recorded update, recorded a little earlier this evening. The 2012 budget passed by the Senate yesterday includes over $54 million in cuts to the pre-K program. $9.5 million is slated to be cut in funding for personnel to ensure that students are prepared for kindergarten. And more than $52 million in savings is to be achieved by reducing the school year from 180 to 160 days and increasing pre-K class size from 20 to 22 students. In tonight's leadership segment, Nwandi Lawson asked Department of Early Care and Learning Commissioner Bobby Cagle how providers will implement the new schedule.
We're allowing flexibility with providers on that, but we're really encouraging them to start later, finish on time along with the other students, and then allow them the best opportunity that they can have in their kindergarten year.
So with the number of days that would be allocated, that would have them starting like at what, October?
About a month later than the other students would start. You know, hopefully families with multiple children that have other children starting would be able to get their older children engaged in their schoolwork, and then would be able to add their other child in shortly thereafter, and hopefully you know, make things more workable for the family as well. There are other proposals that actually shortened the school year or school day to a 4-hour day for preschool, and those were very quickly met with resistance and opposition by a wide variety of groups, and I think everybody quickly came to the conclusion that that was not the best option. So we now have this new proposal, and we think it's one that is very workable for families and in the best interest of the children as well.
In listening to the debate, we heard that there was some concern from caregivers and other advocates about shortening that school day. What is kind of the significance of having children of that age in a school day that it's somewhat longer?
Well, I think the research shows that the more time children of that age are engaged in learning activities, the better. The longer the day and the more intensive the work, the better off they are. And so I think that it is significant, and it really retains the integrity of the program as it was developed some 18 years ago, and I think bodes well for children's futures, because we know that the pre-kindergarten classes really help put them on a path to learning for a lifetime.
The shortened school year is going to mean some cuts to the pay for providers. How will those impact the ability of the program to be able to encourage competent caregivers in the classroom?
The you know, people that get into this work really are there for the love of the children and assuring that they have the very best. I think that's been the thing that has really guided this program throughout, and the fact that we're having to make some cutbacks, it's my sincere hope that those people will stick with us throughout this, and that we'll be able to rebuild the program. And I think the governor has said that his intention is that this is a stopgap measure to assure that we continue the program for as many children as we can, and do it in such a way that we assure quality. And I think by continuing with that focus, we're going to be able to retain those people who've come to the profession with the love of teaching and the love of the children, and continue to do a very good job for the children of Georgia.
So on the one hand, I hear Georgia speaking very proudly about its universal pre-K program. On the other, I hear advocates saying that we're not funding a universal program. Can you help me understand kind of what those two sides are kind of talking about there?
The term universal, as used in pre-kindergarten programs around the country, involves universal access. And unfortunately, there's been no state in the country that has been able to universally provide access to all children. The hope and the prayer of everybody involved in this is that at some point we will be able to assure pre-kindergarten for all children that want to go. Some parents naturally decide that they want to keep their children home and be their teacher themselves. But for those people who want a good quality pre-kindergarten program, our hope is that someday we'll be able to provide truly universal care for all of the children in Georgia. That's about 155,000 children at this point. We are going to be achieving about 86,000 coverage for 86,000 children in the upcoming year. So we're inching toward that. I think that advocates, of course, would have us move much more quickly. We all have that same desire, and it's my hope that we'll continue to work with stakeholders and with legislators and with the governor to achieve the very best that we can do for children.
So for those who think of pre-K as being synonymous with daycare, kind of how do you respond to that?
No, you know, that's a very troubling assertion when I hear that. And I would invite anyone that has that opinion to come spend some time with me, with my staff, and visiting pre-K classroom. Pre-K is predicated upon a set of standards that has been developed through the years, working with our K-12 system to assure that we have good alignment between the standards in pre-kindergarten and those that occur in kindergarten through third grade. We are doing that again as we speak to assure that those children are learning things that are going to be helpful to them as they begin their kindergarten year and continue on through their educational experience. The studies that are out there nationally tell us that a well-structured kindergarten focused on those standards that are focused on in the K through 12 curricula is very important, and that children are much better prepared when they attend pre-kindergarten, and that good preparation makes for a long-lasting success. I think the figures that I have most recently are that children in a Tennessee study were found to be perform 88% better on both reading and math skills than their children in the same state who were not able to attend pre-K. So I think there's evidence out there. There is a whole lot of work that's gone on and continues to go on to assure that we have good academic preparation going on in pre-kindergarten. So again, I would invite those people to come have a conversation with me, go with me to a pre-K classroom, and see what it's really like.
Bobby Cagle is the Commissioner of the Department of Early Care and Learning. We want to thank you so much for appearing here on Primetime Lawmakers.
Thank you very much.
Bobby Cagle formerly served as an administrator for the North Carolina Division of Family and Children's Services. After this short break, we'll be talking teacher pay and education with Tim Callahan of Page. Do bonuses make better teachers? We'll have the answer to that and more in just a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back to Primetime Lawmakers. Teacher pay can be a touchy subject. On one hand, arguments that teacher pay should be merit-based, and that is tying pay to classroom performance of students. On the other, many argue that across the board merit pay is unfair because it doesn't take into account wide differences in student background and school district demographics. Using a $400 million grant, 26 Georgia school districts will begin piloting the federal Race to the Top program next year. And some of those districts could use merit pay as part of the experiment. The point practically everyone agrees on, however, is that some solution must be found to the problem of Georgia's low education rankings. Joining me now to talk about teacher pay is Tim Callahan, the Public Relations and Membership Director of the Professional Association of Georgia Educators. Page, appreciate you joining us this evening. First of all, Page is Georgia's largest association of educators, right?
Yes, we have 81,000 members across the state.
And so people understand it is not a union.
No, it's certainly not. It's a professional association.
How are Georgia teacher pay configured now? How is that figured out?
Right now, it's based on your years of experience and your advanced degrees and your willingness to take on additional burdens.
Is it an individual situation? Each teacher gets a contract, or are there broad guidelines?
Each teacher has a contract. We're paid on a state salary schedule, and then there are local supplements, salary supplements in some systems across the state.
Are high-performing teachers paid more than low-performing educators?
Not necessarily, no. We don't have that. We're paid according to the salaried schedule. And that's the nub of the problem, that people say we want to pay our highest performers. The question is, how do we identify them? How do we fairly do that? And how do we adequately compensate them?
Now, how do we track performance now?
Right now, we're looking at really harried principals who show up in the back of your classroom for about 15 minutes with a checklist. And they check a few boxes and then later on have a conference with you and say you're doing this well and this not so well and so on and so forth. It's really not a very good system. I don't think anyone's really happy with it.
So it's subjective, really, when you get right down to it.
Indeed it is. Indeed it is.
And you're not using any numbers, any data, any grades, that sort of thing to really come up with this?
Not as much as we should be, and certainly not as much as will be contemplated in the race to the top counties.
I'm glad you mentioned that. That dovetails into something. Our sister program, Primetime Politics, recently taped a program about Race to the Top. And I talked with Teresa McCartney, Implementation Director for Race to the Top at the Department of Education, and Dr. Steve Dollinger of the Georgia Partnership for Excellence in Education. We talked about the 4 core areas of the grant: standards and assessments, teacher and leader effectiveness, robust data systems, and the turning around of low-achieving schools. Let's take a look at what they had to say. 48% of the students in the state are covered by Race to the Top, and low-achieving schools. And do you have a feel for how many that might help?
Well, I think it's a rising tide lifts all ships, that old saying.
Right.
So I think what we're going to see now is putting out some expectations. I think it's an important point to make, though, that these are not 4 separate and discrete areas to focus on. Right. As we work on all 4 of those, you mentioned the longitudinal data system, we need that to do the value-add model for teacher performance. So that will help us look at the data to know where our students are, and then for teachers to address those areas. Then for principals to look at the whole data to hold teachers accountable for their students. So it's all coming together quite nicely.
Who watches this? Who looks at these numbers to say that, okay, we're on track?
That's my job as implementation within Race to the Top, to make sure that, because really Race to the Top is more than the Department of Education. It's working with all of our partners in the state, all of our education agencies, because this work's going to impact everyone, not only at a school level, but also working with our colleges of education, and are they producing the best teachers? How do you hand out the money for this? There's $400 million that you'll spread over these 26 school systems. Now, how does the money plug into these different areas? Well, the $400 million is actually split. $200 million will go down to the 26 LEAs, and $200 million will be utilized at the state level to be able to train the teachers on rolling out the Common Core, on being able to develop that statewide evaluation system, but then also being able to train the teachers and the administrators on that evaluation system, to be able to build that P20 data system, and really to be able to provide additional resources on getting the most qualified teacher in the classroom and working with partners. So Georgia Partnership for Education happy with that plan? Oh,
There's not enough human and financial resources for any school system to do this by themselves. So Teresa's right. It takes partnerships for everyone to come together. So getting the different agencies to align their work, that's going to make things more streamlined, and in the business community we think that's efficient use of taxpayer dollars.
You know, in the marketplace, we pay for performance. Let's face it, we have bonuses. Paying for performance, yeah. Standards and assessments, teacher and leadership effectiveness, robust data systems. Looks like at least these 26 school systems, Tim, are going to have some of these hard numbers we're talking about.
It sounds good. It really does on paper. We'll see. Our concern is they're trying to roll it out very fast. They expect to have folks trained on an evaluation system by July. That evaluation system is still being put together. So I have a feeling it's sort of like we're on one end of the runway and the Race to the Top folks are saying, we promise there'll be wings on the plane by the time we get to the other end of the runway.
Well, at least the Race to the Top grant application came up with the goals to be met. So,
indeed.
It's not a federal mandate. The feds accepted our program, right?
They did indeed, although they had a lot of input on parameters of the grant. But it's going to be a challenging next couple of years. Right now, what we're finding out is teachers in those 26 school systems have really no idea what they've been signed up for. And I think there's going to become a day of reckoning fairly soon. Now, as far as evaluating performance, you know, it'd be nice, right now we do it subjectively. Yeah. Yeah, so we'll have some numbers, at least some numbers to play with and Race to the Top to begin with. Sure. Does it take a combination of both things to really come up with the right picture? It does, and it's a more complex picture than it first seems. Value-added data is what have you done with the students from the start of the school year to the end of the school year? We look at test scores, and have you improved them? Have you brought them along? Sounds simple, but the research says that unless we have about 10 years worth of data on a given teacher, we really are going to make a mistake about 40, 50, or 60% of the time when we say you're a great teacher, you're a good teacher, you're a not so good teacher. We really need a lot of data over a period of years, so it really is a little more complicated than it sounds.
I'm glad you mentioned value added, because the Atlanta Journal-Constitution is going to do a large story in the Sunday paper. I think they even talked to you about it, right? They did. And to explain what it is, Georgia is in the process of selecting a student growth model or value-added system that's the engine to measure performance, and it works like this. Using a mathematic formula, a student's existing test scores are inputted and based on several years of historical data. Then their future performance is predicted. If a teacher exceeds that future performance model, then they're rewarded. If they don't, then things have to be done. I mean, we're modeling what might happen in the future. Does that scare you?
Well, you know, I think if we do it the right way and we do it well, I think it could be a great thing. But our concern is we are racing to do this, and I think the concern I'm hearing from our members is, let's go slowly on this stuff because it's very complex, and we're going to make some mistakes if we go too fast with it. I think most teachers are happy to be evaluated in a very comprehensive way. Most teachers will stand by the performance of their students and are proud of it. But I think they want to be measured in a way that is fair and takes into account a whole lot of variables.
What about just the ultimate carrot? Give you a bonus, you know, if you do well.
You know, the research says it doesn't work. Vanderbilt University did a 3-year study where they compared thousands of teachers who were told they would get a bonus if they improved student achievement with thousands of teachers who were not given such a bonus. What they found was there was no difference in the achievement levels. You know, it isn't like teachers are in the classroom each day saying, you know, I'm going to hold back a little bit. I'm not going to hit a home run today because the bonus isn't on the table. I'll wait. I'll just hit some singles. When I see that bonus money, then I'll do it. It doesn't work that way. Teachers are working very hard every day trying to do their best with their students. And the demographics of classes differ quite a bit. When I taught, one year I would get a group of kids that were just, man, they were like TV students. They knew every answer. They leapt at the chance to speak and write and do well in my English classes. A year later, I get a group of kids that I don't know where they came from. They were sort of little different group. Was I a great teacher in the first year and suddenly I became a bad teacher in the second year? I don't think so.
One more thing here, and we talked about this earlier, in the 40 seconds so we have left.
Sure.
What STAR students say make the best STAR teachers?
Yeah, Page sponsors the STAR Student and Teacher Program where we pick the best high school kids in the state. And we pick them by GPA and SAT scores and so on. We asked them to pick the best teacher, the one that had the most impact on them. Over 20 years, they tell us the same 4 things consistently. Number 1, they knew their subject matter cold. Number 2, they were so enthusiastic about math, they made me enthusiastic about math. Number 3, they had a sense of humor. And number 4, they took an interest in me as a person. Remarkable how consistent that has been from our best kids and our best teachers over 20 years. I look at value added and I say, where's the measure for that?
It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Thanks for your time and your comments on all this evening.
You're very welcome.
And we all have great teachers that we
sure
still
do.
love to this
Sure
day.
do.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate you being here, Tim. You can learn more about Race to the Top by tuning into Primetime Politics at 7 p.m. on Monday, April 4th on GPB. Primetime Lawmakers will not be seen tomorrow because the General Assembly is not in session. So be sure and tune into Primetime Politics for a program featuring several national leaders in the area of the federal deficit and fiscal solutions. It might just scare you, but you need to know about this. It's 7 o'clock tomorrow on GPB. See a repeat of this broadcast tomorrow morning at 5:30 right here. Coming up next, Georgia Outdoors. Join host Sharon Collins as she explores fishing in Georgia with the perfect catch. Georgia Outdoors is next here on GPB. And that's our broadcast for this 37th Legislative Day of the 2011 session. Thanks for our guest for joining us tonight. For Wandy Lawson and the Primetime Lawmakers team, I'm Scott Slade. Tune in tomorrow at 7 for Primetime Politics. Have a good night.
This is a GPB original production.